I didn't mean to stay out past sunset. It had been one of those days that felt like a held breath, and the only way I know to exhale is to walk the trails behind my neighborhood. The woods there aren't wild, power lines stitch across a hill, and a rusted fire road runs crooked through the hemlocks, but they're quiet enough to let the mind unspool. I brought a bottle of water, my phone, and nothing else but the mood to be ordinary. The air was warm, the mosquitoes drowsy, and the western sky was smearing itself into gold. It started with a flicker. Not the hard white flash of a plane slipping between clouds, not the lazy wink of a satellite, not even the floaty blur of a lantern some teenager might have let go. This light stuttered behind the tree line at the ridge of the East Trail, where the fire road tips into a shallow valley and a creek makes a sound like someone shushing a room. It was a soft blue at first, like the edge of a gas stove, then a pulse that whitened and whitened again with no rhythm I recognized. I stopped because the light stopped me, not physically, not like I'd walked into a fence, but as if something in the light tugged a thread through me and I had to check that the thread was real. Birds went silent. Even the creek seemed to suspend its consonants. I listened and heard my own breath, and under it, a faint electrical hum that might have been a transformer on the pole above the trail. I told myself that was all it was, a transformer buzzing before the night took on its shape. The light pulsed again. There's a bench at the top of the ridge. It's never been stable, the front leg sinks in the damp mud and the back tilts like it wants to sit you upright and teach you posture. I sat anyway and felt that hum ride the muscles along my spine like a tuning fork. The sun slid lower. The trees grew thin and then dense again as shadows braided themselves between them. The light flickered in the deepened blue, less like a beacon now and more like a heartbeat, or a mouth breathing. A rational thought came like a chaperone: call someone. Tell them you're out here, that you saw strange lights near the old tower. But the idea of saying it out loud felt like breaking a spell I hadn't meant to cast. I put my phone back in my pocket and stood up. Routine steps, heel, toe, the trail's familiar grain underfoot. The light answered by fading to nothing, as if coy. I could have gone home then. I should have. I'm not special, I don't have a voice that narrates crises with calm expertise. I just had an afternoon that didn't want to end, and a light that asked me to follow it. At the bottom of the slope the air cooled sharply, the way air pools in a stone cellar. The hum came stronger. I thought of the old power substation down by County Road 7, but the hum wasn't coming from below, it sat in the canopy, droning through needles and leaves, making their edges vibrate. When I reached the creek, I expected the water to drown the sound. Instead, the creek muted itself. I watched it slip past rocks with the care of someone trying not to wake a sleeping house. Then the smell, ozone, yes, but tinged with something metallic and minty, like a new coin sucked in a winter mouth. I waited for a deer to crash through the brush, waited for the ordinary world to assert itself with a snort and a clatter. The world declined to do that. The light returned, not above the trees now, but among them, a vertical seam of glare opening and closing as if the forest had a zipper. When it opened, I saw space beyond that didn't match space here. It looked like mist that wasn't mist, a gray the eye kept trying to name and failing. I stepped forward, then back. The seam slid left. It had playful patience. It wanted to be pursued without seeming to want anything at all. I told myself stories that would make it nothing more than a trick of air and dusk. There's a barn beyond the East Trail, I could be seeing a truck's high beams bouncing off metal siding. There's a water tower beyond the ridge, the setting sun might be catching a strut. There's a hiker, like me, with one of those lantern apps on their phone. The stories calmed me. They didn't fit the hum. The path forked. The left fork stayed safe, bending toward the fire road and the promise of a straight shot to the cul-de-sac. The right fork thinned to a deer trail that I've always pretended isn't there. The light threaded that deer trail like a needle going in and out of skin. I felt the tug again in that inner thread, gentle as a fisherman testing a line. I went right. The trees closed behind me in a way I felt more than saw. The trail narrowed and then forgot itself entirely. I pushed through ferns as tall as my thighs. Each step sounded too loud. Every twig that snapped underfoot got its own echo. The seam of light flickered, always 20 feet ahead, always at the next clump of laurel. The hum resolved into a pattern that was almost, but not quite, musical. Not notes, intervals, as if the space between tones mattered more than any tone itself. After 10 minutes, or maybe 30, I reached a clearing I didn't know existed. The ground here was pocked with shallow basins like footprints left by a giant creature that had decided to walk on its heels. In the center stood a structure, not a tower, not a tree, but a ring of something that stole shape from the objects around it. When I looked directly at it, it was a hoop of dull metal. When I glanced away and back, it was rough as bark. My mind tried to average the views and came up with a blank. The seam of light slid toward the ring and widened. I can tell the truth of what I felt then. I wasn't yet afraid. My nervous system thrummed, yes, but the feeling had edges of delight, of curiosity relieved to find an object worthy of itself. Here, at last, was an unknown that wasn't just a crossword clue or a new password to remember. Here was something with an appetite. I stepped closer. The ring had no seams or bolts. It was about the height of my shoulder and as thick as my arm, and it sang like a refrigerator when you press your ear to it and hear the secret intelligence of its motor. On the ground, prints, three-toed, bird-like, yet heavy enough to compress the leaf litter into wet maps. One print overlapped my shoe. It had been here recently. Or it still was. Something crossed the clearing behind me with a whisper that did not match wind. I turned too slowly to see it. The seam of light widened until it wasn't a seam at all anymore but a mouth that wanted to speak. The first word it formed was not any word I knew, but my mind supplied one anyway. Come. The hum asked my bones to believe. I could have run. I could have marked the trees with strips of shirt fabric like a character in a cautionary tale. Instead I put my hand on the ring, and it was warm. The light went out. Night arrived as if it had been waiting impatiently for me to finish. Crickets shrilled. The creek resumed its consonance. Above the canopy, a single star tore free of the sky's deepening bruise. I stood with my palm on nothing. The ring was gone. I told myself I must have taken a wrong turn on a trail that did not exist. I told myself the ring was a trick of contrast. I told myself it was truly time to go home. Then, behind me, something exhaled. I turned, and saw eyes. Not shining like an animal's in a headlamp, not glowing under their own power, but reflecting more than they were given. They were too far apart. They were too low to be a deer. They blinked sideways, once. Hello. I said, because the simplest words are often the only ones available. The eyes didn't move. The breath came again, wet and deliberate. I stood in the clearing with a pocket full of dead explanations and the new knowledge that being out late can make a different kind of day begin. I've been startled by raccoons. I've jumped at fox screams, the kind that splits the night like a tearing seam. I've even met a black bear once on a trail at noon and watched it turn away as indifferent as weather. None of those moments resembled this one. The eyes held, not with animal curiosity, not with hunger, not even with fear. They held the way a sound holds in a cathedral, meant and measured. My tongue went dry. I tried another, hello, quieter, like I was whispering in a theater during a long pause between lines. Something in the brush answered me with silence so absolute it felt performed. Then the hum returned, not from the ring, I knew it was gone now, but from the shape where the eyes were set. It was a higher hum than before, pitched near the edge of what nerves can register, like the whine of a distant power saw under water. The eyes drifted. Not step by step. They slid, as if the thing that carried them wasn't crawling or walking but persuaded space to reconfigure for it. As it moved, the smell of ozone braided tighter with the mint metal tang until the back of my throat prickled. I tried to cough and managed a squeak that sounded like it belonged to a smaller version of me. Afraid yet? A voice in my head asked. The answer was complicated. I was becoming afraid the way late light becomes evening, incrementally, so that hope keeps revising your estimate. I took a careful step backward. The basins in the clearing's floor did their work, my heel slid into one, and I teetered, pinwheeling. The eyes snapped brighter for a count of 2, then softened. I righted myself and understood that I had been measured, not the way a predator measures distance, but the way a carpenter measures for fit. I needed a tool. You can laugh later, but the mind wants equipment. I fumbled for my phone and raised it like a talisman. The lock screen lit the clearing in a square of human certainty. The signal indicator blinked out. Battery at 72%. No bars. The camera app opened and showed me the clearing framed in that neutral, forgiving gaze cameras give the world. I pointed at the eyes and tapped. The screen stuttered. The image tore itself into stripes, green and violet, then froze as if it had run into a wall. Okay, I said, to the phone or the eyes or myself. Okay. The eyes tilted, a gesture so human I almost said, "Are you mocking me?" But the tilt was observation, not contempt. Leaves shivered. In a stand of mountain laurel to my right, a second pair of eyes blinked open, smaller, set higher, like a child peering over a pew. They were too far apart as well. The first eyes slid toward the second, and I felt a pressure change, a soft shove against the eardrums that made me swallow hard. Pop pop. The hum braided into a harmony that failed to resolve. "Do you want me to go?" I asked, because I am, at heart, a guest in all rooms. The smaller eyes dimmed, then brightened, as if trying on my question. The larger pair advanced by one sliding increment. I took another step back and felt the baseline of my fear rise, as steady and impersonal as a thermostat clicking over. What do you do when the woods learn your name? That is how it felt, as if the leaves had whispered a syllable and found that syllable was me. I pictured the map in my head, the muscle memory of turns that would lead me back to the ridge, to the bench, to the open fire road and the relief of gravel underfoot. 5 minutes if I walked fast. 10 if I trod carefully through the deer trail. I backed toward the faint track I thought I'd made. The hum deepened. The smaller eyes went dark, then lit from farther left, as if they were circling me with pieces on a game board I didn't know I was on. The ring had been an invitation. These were the hosts. "Show me," I said, and my voice shook but didn't break. It felt absurd, asking something I could not name for a demonstration. But isn't that what we do when life gives us an instrument we don't know how to play? We hand it back and ask for a chord. The larger eyes blinked sideways again and the clearing's air pressed down, then rebounded. Between the eyes a crease appeared, not a mouth, not a beak. But an articulation, a seam that parted without revealing anything so ordinary as a tongue or teeth. From that seam came a sound like 2 stones rubbed underwater. Words tried to form around it in my head and failed. I felt meaning, but I couldn't catch its clothes. On the ground near my shoe, leaves stirred. A shape flowed out of shadow and became a handprint. Not mine. Not human in design. 3 long digits, a smaller hooked spur set back from the palm like a thumb that had rethought its role. The print was fresh and dry in a carpet of damp leaf litter. The shape that made it was not where the eyes were. The eyes were observers while the hand, or whatever it belonged to, worked elsewhere. "I don't understand," I said. The seam folded closed. The hum returned to its higher thread. I lifted the phone again, thinking flashlight. The beam cut the clearing into slices and made the eyes dim. In the laurel to the left, my light met shape. It rejected it. The beam skittered over an outline that was liquid and angular at once, a geometry that wanted to reconcile with my expectations and failed in slow motion. The best I can do is say it looked like a mantis that had studied statues of deer, then decided the study was sufficient and built a body from notes. Limbs were long and reversed at joints that implied opinions about direction. A torso? Perhaps, but it made fewer promises about inside and outside than torsos do here. The head, if that's what held the eyes, was low and forward, as if it preferred horizon to sky. When the light hit it full, it did not recoil. It moved the way a book moves when you close it, a hinge you didn't know was there performing a quiet miracle. 2 steps, no, 2 rearrangements, and it was near the ring's absence again, regarding the place where the metal had been. A memory rose, the hoop warm under my palm. I touched the air as if the hoop might agree to be there again. Warmth ghosted across my skin. Not heat. Attention. The smaller eyes did a thing I have seen only in people, relief. It was as if something had been tense in their configuration and let go a millimeter. The larger eyes brightened softly. The hum broke into discrete pulses. A rhythm. 1 2, pause. 1 2 3, pause. It was knocking. It had been knocking all along. I knocked back. 3 taps on the air where the ring had stood, because I had no better plan. The pulses shifted. 1 2 3 4. I matched them, hand on nothing, knocking into a circle of absence while 2 beings watched and learned or taught, I couldn't say which. I realized I was smiling, absurdly, as if I were playing a game with a child at a family gathering. So much for fear, I thought. Look at you. You've made friends with night. Then something changed. A wind arrived without moving the trees. The hair on my arms rose as if it were trying to say something my mouth could not. The pulses accelerated to a chatter, then wove into a continuous tone that pushed the air thick. From the seam in the not mouth of the larger one, a new sound came, higher, urgent. The smaller eyes snapped sideways, then went dark. I strained to hear the reason. Then I did. Footsteps. Not the delicate tread of their movement. Boot steps. Human, and many, crashing down the deer trail like a squad of certainty. A voice, this way. Lights were over here. Another, lower, kill the lamps. We don't want to spook. They were not there for a walk. They were there with purpose, with weight, with the absence of wonder that makes room for orders. My stomach slipped downward. Whatever this was, I didn't want it seen by that kind of seeing. I won't, I whispered, not sure what I meant. I won't call them over. I won't stay. I won't betray you. I won't betray myself. The larger eyes fixed on me, bright as wet coins. The seam parted. Warmth pressed against my palm, this time unmistakable. The ring came back into being the way an afterimage comes back when you close your eyes against a bright window. The air outlined it. The air thickened at its edges. It was not metal now. It was decision. Go, I said, to them or me, I don't know. Boots hit the clearing's lip. Flashlights flared, skittered, stabbed. The ring pulsed. The being slid toward the ring, and I understood what the handprint had promised. This was not a door. It was a threshold that picked its crossings with care. Hey, a human voice shouted, and a beam found my face. You. Stay where you are. I didn't. I stepped sideways as the ring brightened and the hum became a presence that filled the hollows of my bones. The larger one paused at the ring's edge and regarded me once more, a gaze unblinking and, impossible word, affectionate. Then it passed through and was not there. The smaller eyes flashed high among the laurel, then slid into the ring's brightness. The handprint on the ground blurred. Air shrugged. The lights behind me carved the clearing into frantic shapes as men tumbled in with radios hissing and breath loud. The ring remained for a breath. Then it closed like a book. They were not in uniform, not exactly, but the flavor of uniform hung around them. Dark jackets, muted logos, boots that had walked through places with fences. One of them, the one who had shouted, kept his beam on me while the others swept the clearing, their light finding the basins, the laurel, the absence where the ring had been, the print that was already collapsing into leaf again. He said, "You okay?" like a line he had practiced in front of a mirror. "I was walking," I said. "I saw lights. Truths come easier when they are partial." "Aha." He made a note on a small pad he didn't need. "Alone?" I nodded. He made another note. Another man crouched where the handprint had been, pressed his fingers to the earth, sniffed them, frowned. "Ionization," he muttered, and someone else said, "Yeah. And there's a field gradient north-south. You feel that?" They both stood, listening to the hum that was no longer present except in my bones. "Ma'am," the first one said, even though the beam at my face made me a featureless creature. "We'll walk you out." "I know the way," I said. Fear had settled now into a dense little stone behind my ribs. It wasn't for them. It was for what they might take from the place by being the kind of eyes they were. "I come here all the time." He let the light drift off my face and become a planet among the trees. "We had reports of unusual activity," he said. "Drones. Fireworks." "Fireworks," someone else repeated softly, like a prayer for ordinary explanations. "Did you see anyone else?" the first one asked. "Kids? Anyone with equipment?" The urge to answer yes was strong. Yes, there were teenagers with sparklers. Yes, a hiker with a headlamp. Yes, a poacher with a monocular. Yes, 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 now please go. I swallowed. "No," I said. "Just me." They exchanged looks that intersected in a triangle of disappointments. The man with the pad tucked it into his jacket. "We'll escort you to the road," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. We walked. The deer trail widened to a thread of human intent again. The men were quiet in the way people are quiet when they are listening to a language you can't hear. Every so often one of them would stop, lift his head, and the others would stop too, as if sniffing the air might announce a world's return. The laurel's leaves made a sound like soft applause when we brushed them. "What division are you with?" I asked finally. Polite questions are a shield, thin but real. "County safety," the first one said, and I didn't believe him. He was not lying exactly. He was naming a smaller room inside a larger building. "You shouldn't be out here after dark," he added, which was true, which made me want to argue. At the ridge bench we paused. It leaned as always. The western sky was gone to indigo, a few stubborn embers still glowing where the horizon dragged its feet. Below, the fire road was a pale thread. The men's radios clicked and murmured. They were using words like sweep and stable and negative. A woman's voice came back sharp and precise, and the men's spines adjusted to its calibration. This, too, was a language. "What did you see?" the first one asked, softer now, as if the bench's slant made him reflective. "Really? A seam opening. A ring made of decision. Eyes reflecting more than they were given." I watched the space where my description would live and found it inhospitable to his question. "Lights," I said, and then, because truth likes allies, "a ring." It was warm. His eyebrows climbed a notch. "Warm," he repeated, as if the word had come to him from a childhood story. "I touched it," I said. "Probably stupid." He was quiet long enough to make the word probably unnecessary. "Don't talk about this online," he said finally, as if he were asking for a kindness rather than issuing an order. "We've got a nuisance with folks who like to, you know." He waggled a hand, meaning the whole constellation of late-night postings and the frenzy they attract. "I don't plan to," I said, and that was true. The experience felt like a secret a place had told me. Bringing it to a crowd would bruise it. "Do people see a lot of lights here?" "People see what they want," he said, which is something people say when they don't want to answer. Coyotes scream. Kids rig up LEDs on balloons. There's a lab over in Weatherly does atmospheric stuff. It's a busy sky. We started down the fire road. Gravel gave under our boots with the sound of real terrain. At the cul-de-sac, 2 black SUVs idled in polite darkness. A third truck, civilian, sat across from them, its driver a man in a high-visibility vest with the posture of someone who would call the county if your trash cans were left out past noon. He watched me like I was a problem solved correctly by other people. The first man gestured toward the sidewalk. "You live close." "2 streets over," I said. "I'll walk." He offered, no, he arranged, to accompany me to the corner, where we stood under a jaundiced street lamp that hummed in a key I now recognized as a parody of the other hum. "Take care," he said, and his eyes softened in a way that told me he had seen something once he hadn't been able to put on his pad either. Then he walked back to his world of radios. I went inside my small house and shut the door and put my hand against it like a person in a movie does when they've outrun something. My kitchen smelled like the ordinary mercy of dish soap. The clock on the microwave said 10:48. I had been gone hours longer than I thought. I reached for water, for ritual. I drank in gulps and felt the cold build a staircase down my chest. Only then did the fear arrive fully dressed. It knocked politely. I let it in. I sat at the table and listened to the house settle, to the refrigerator's familiar motor, to the headlights passing on the street outside as neighbors returned from dinners and practice and lives that had not rearranged themselves around a clearing and a ring. My heart refused to slow. It bounced against my ribs in a pattern I didn't recognize. The hum was still with me. It had changed its mind about leaving. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and watched the ceiling learn me, watched the window take on its rectangle, watched the room notify itself of dawn's approach. Every time my body eased toward rest, a tiny pressure against my inner ear would pop and wake me with the sensation of having missed a call. It wasn't unpleasant. It wasn't pleasant. It was an invitation pressed under a door. At 4 in the morning the house breathed differently. I sat up. The hum strengthened. My phone, face down on the nightstand, buzzed once without lighting. I turned it over. No notifications. No bars. The clock read 4:03. The room held itself very still. Okay, I said to no one, and to someone, and to the version of me that had put a palm on a ring in the woods. Okay. I dressed without turning on lights. I left the house on foot, not pausing at the street lamp's puddle to be sensible. The hum led. It didn't call. It accompanied, like a friend who doesn't ask if you're sure. The neighborhood was ordinary in pre-dawn. Sprinklers had done their clacking work in the night, leaving dark arcs on the sidewalks. A newspaper plastic wrapped itself into a glistening fish on a driveway. A single kitchen window glowed warm in a house where someone loved mornings enough to forgive them. I turned at the corner, then again, and the hum clarified into direction. It was there, down the fire road, through the shy deer trail, into the clearing that would or would not be there for me. I will tell you the truth. I was more afraid of not finding it than of finding it. The clearing waited, not patient, not impatient, but as a kind of fact. Dawn had not yet infiltrated the undergrowth. The world was indigo and charcoal and the blue that lives between ribs. The basins in the ground held a darker dark. The laurel's leaves collected the idea of light and kept it for later. I stood at the clearing's lip and felt the hum lift my skin in gooseflesh, as if my body were an instrument tuning itself to a pitch played from another room. "Hi," I said, because I had to say something. Breath steamed, not much, just enough to prove I was here. The ring came back not with a flash but the way a bruise rises, slowly, blooming from absence into presence with a logic that requires no permission. It wasn't metal. It wasn't bark. It was the shape of attention. Warmth rolled off it in a sigh. I stepped forward and felt the ground soften, as if the basins were offering to hold my feet. I put my hand where my hand had been before. It was a small vow. The ring answered with a gentle push against my palm, like a cat leaning into a scratch. Then the air in the center thickened. Not a picture. Not a surface. A deepening, as if the world had decided it could be more world there. Are you there? I asked. The eyes appeared, not in pairs this time, but as a pattern, 6 points set on a curve, blinking in sequence, left to right to left, then closing together until they made a brief line of light. The hum shifted to the knocking rhythm. 1 2, pause. 1 2 3. I matched it on the ring. I realized I was grinning again and felt absurd, but the absurdity was a scaffold. It kept me from falling through into awe. The smaller eyes slid up to the height of my shoulder, then higher, then lower, trying on vantage points like hats. The larger presence emerged from the laurel's shadow, deliberate, limbs rearranging themselves with the calm of well-considered intention. In the black blue of not quite morning, its outline was a guess my brain kept upgrading. It passed near me and the air around it made a tiny fizzing sound, as if it carried weather in a pocket. You came back, I said, and then I laughed at myself, because what a human thing to say. As if returning were a moral choice, a sign of character. The seam in what I call its face parted. The sound it made was smaller now, closer, like an ember blown on gently. My body understood it as approval and a caution braided together. I nodded, absurdly, as if I had been given instructions and accepted them. Behind us, the world brightened by a single unit. Birds test-marked their captions. Somewhere far off a truck coughed to life. The clearing held its own dawn, separate, set to a different clock. What is it? I asked, meaning the ring, meaning the hum, meaning the business of being here. The answer came as pressure, a hand on the back of my neck, a weight on my tongue, a lift in my knees, and then released. It wasn't words. It was a demonstration by sensation, open, it pressed, closed, it let go. The ring, then. Door. Threshold. No, not those. The ring was a mouth that spoke not by sound. A lung that introduced breath to a place that had not considered breathing before. I can get maudlin with metaphor if I'm not careful. I will say it this way, the ring connected. To what? That, it did not show me. The smaller eyes drifted behind me. I turned and found it closer than comfort allows. It extended a limb and stopped a foot from my forearm, as if asking. The limb was long and supple and jointed in ways that made me rethink the word joint. At its end, an arrangement that was not a hand and not a hand. I offered my forearm. It touched me the way a violin bow touches a string. Where it passed, the hair rose, but not from cold. It read me. That's what it felt like. It took a measurement I could not feel until it was done, and then I felt oddly aligned, as if a chiropractor had worked not on bones but on a story. Does it hurt you? I asked, worried suddenly about my warmth, my bacteria, the oils in my skin. The limb withdrew and flexed itself into shapes as if considering the question. Then it set the knot hand on the ring's edge, where my palm had been, and pressed. The ring brightened. It did not flare. It found a slightly different shade of being here. I thought of the men with their radios and SUVs and instruments under other names. I thought of their impatience. I thought of their pads. I could not know their orders or their reasons, but I knew the kind of hunger that wears a badge. They came last night, I said. They'll come again. The larger one turned its eyes on me. The seam opened and held, not speaking, just available. I felt a tension like a hand on the back of my head, guiding my gaze to the basins in the soil. Prints had overlapped them until the basins were more print than land. This was not the first visit. It wouldn't be the last. A reassurance uncoiled slowly. This was not a rarity to them. It was not a miracle. It was a practice. I can keep quiet, I said, and meant it. Was I being recruited? No. I was being trusted with a thing places sometimes do, they choose a person to be the keeper of a story. Not its teller, not its seller, not even its protector in the dramatic sense. Just someone to keep it safe from turning into a performance. Dawn thinned. The sky took on its first ridiculous pink. The hum dimmed. The ring cooled. I knew what that meant. The visit had a shape, and the shape had edges we could not ignore without making it something else. I didn't want that. I wanted it to be itself and wanted to be myself near it. Will I see you tonight? I asked, and then, quickly, should I? The sea made a small sound that made my stomach lurch in a way I now associated with yes. The smaller one blinked in a pattern I obediently matched on the ring. 1 2 pause. 1 2 3 4. I laughed at my own eagerness. The larger one slid backward, becoming less and more itself as it did. The ring's presence rippled, then wavered, then steadied. They were waiting for me to go so they could go. Courtesy, it turned out, travels both ways. Okay, I said. Okay. I'll come back when the edges soften. I backed away like I was leaving a new friend's house after a first visit, both parties relieved and awkward in the same measure. On the trail home, the birds took up their jobs with a kind of greedy enthusiasm that made me love them more fiercely than usual. The hum muted to a memory. The map in my head reclaimed the fork, the ridge, the bench that refuses to behave. My house smelled like coffee I hadn't yet made. The microwave clock said 5:27, a time that looks more like a combination than an hour. I showered. I tried to work. The day refused to hold me well. It shrugged me off its shoulders repeatedly, and I fell back into the clearing like a thought. By noon, curiosity had been replaced by a slender, adamant fear. Not of them. Of losing this. Of the men coming with bigger radios, with bigger words. Of the ring becoming a sight with a sign. Of it being measured into lifelessness. Every sound outside, a truck backing up, a neighbor's dog, a drone toy, made me flinch. At sunset I went back. I thought I knew what to expect. I thought a pattern had been offered, and I had learned it. It's funny, the arrogance of a lesson on its second day. I walked in as the sky performed its evening generosity, clouds purpling, the creek rehearsing for night. Coyotes sang somewhere beyond the ridge, their chords falling over one another like a wash of water-glass beads. The bench sulked, the deer trail pretended not to exist, and then it did. The clearing was empty. No basins, no prints, no ring, no hum. The absence was theatrical, as if the place had changed sets when I wasn't looking. I stood there and felt embarrassment bloom in my face, at myself, at my wanting, at the way hope can make a fool of the careful. Okay, I said, forcing a laugh at myself, at the idiot who shows up to a party a night late. Night thickened. I stayed anyway. I could not have said why, except that going home would have turned the absence into a verdict, and I wasn't done arguing my case. The woods settled into a hiss. A whippoorwill looped its name, and the creek said SHH with a persistence that felt personal. The first hour passed as if sliding down a well-greased chute. The second hour put teeth in its gears. At some point in the third hour, the hum returned, so faint at first I thought I had imagined it. I held my breath and it grew, no, it came near. The ring did not materialize. The eyes did not open in their confident pattern. Instead there was a glow at ground level like phosphorescence on a shoal. The basins in the earth brightened one by one, then dimmed in reply to one another, a slow Morse I could not parse. I stood perfectly still and felt the fear at last climb fully onto my shoulders and take a seat. It wrapped its arms around my throat in that petulant way fear has. The woods had learned my name. Now they pronounced it with authority. Where are you? I whispered. The answer came behind me, not as shape or light but as temperature, a drip of heat down my spine, a wash of cool up both arms. Weight shifted in the dark. Not boots. Not careful alien grace. Many feet, small, like a pack of animals testing new boundaries. My chest squeezed. I turned too fast. The glow at ground level smudged and then sharpened into many tiny points. Not eyes. Markers. Breadcrumbs tossed by a hand that wanted me to see a path where there was none. I backed into the clearing center because the middle is where you go when you can't pick a side. The hum thickened and thinned like breath, and the little lights on the ground moved as if blown by a wind I couldn't feel. They formed a circle around me. They opened at one edge, closed at another, rearranged themselves until the pattern made a new kind of sense, not a circle. A spiral. Its mouth pointed toward the laurel. Its tail pointed at my shoes. Is this for me? I asked, no, mostly hoping the answer would be no. The spiral shifted, tightened, breathed. The tail touched my toe and retreated. I could not pretend I didn't understand. I stepped forward and the light softened, making room for my footfall. I took another step. The spiral led me anti-clockwise, past the place where the ring had been and on into a darker dark where the trees thickened and the creek gave up speaking and only held its cold vowels in its mouth. The lights followed in a quiet rustle, not sound, not light, a presence that stroked the air. 10 steps, 50, 100, time stretched like dough. My legs trembled and I told them that trembling was allowed, even good, even proof that I was not being foolish, that my body had elected to keep me safe the way it knows how. I passed under a branch that had never been there before and then had always been there. The hum rose. The lights converged. A seam opened in the night ahead. Not the ring, not the mouth in metal. An opening without edges. An offer to be in two places at once. I stopped. The fear hugged me closer, a jealous friend. I don't know, I said, and that was the most honest thing I had said in days. I thought of my bed, of my morning coffee, of the microwave clock's stubborn numerals. Of neighbors who wave at me with a kindness that does not ask me to be more than I am. I thought of the men with their pads and their radios. I thought of the warmth of the ring under my hand, of eyes that reflect more than they are given, of the way a limb can read a forearm and realign a story. I thought of the smell of ozone and minted metal and the pop in the ear that means a threshold is performing its physics nearby. I don't know, I said again, and this time I said it to the dark that had made itself into a door. The spiral of lights dimmed and brightened like a pulse that had agreed to be patient. The hum shifted into the knocking pattern. 1 2, pause. 1 2 3, pause. It was not a signal anymore. It was a heartbeat I could choose to match. I put my hand out. No ring met it. Air did. Warm, heavy air, like the air above a lake in August at midnight when the storm has not yet decided whether to rain. On my palm, the warmth collected like a small creature curling into sleep. Behind me, the first coyotes of the night decided to try their song again, far away and near at once. The opening pulsed. Come, it said, or maybe it said stay. The words are not reliable here. I'm scared, I said, because I wanted whoever or whatever had offered this to know that my fear was not my answer but my company. The seam, door, opening did what only the truest invitations do. It did not insist. It did not plead. It stayed open, and by staying open, it made a case. My foot lifted. It hovered at the threshold. I set it down on the same side as the rest of me. Not tonight, I said. My voice trembled. But soon. The lights did not sulk. They unraveled from spiral into a loose pattern like constellations that have changed their minds about telling a story. The hum softened to a thread you could wind around your finger. The opening narrowed, slowed, and then let the idea of itself go without resentment. Night retook its territory inch by inch. The world around me exhaled. I stood there and felt my fear rearrange itself into a shape I could carry. Not a stone behind the ribs now. A small creature that would sit on my shoulder and whisper caution, and sometimes be right. I walked back to the clearing. The basins were visible again, the laurel whispered and did not know what it whispered, the creek took up its consonants with relief. By the time I reached the ridge, dawn had stolen a march on me, smearing the east with a gray that is its own contentment. At home, I wrote down everything. Not to show. Not to prove. To keep. To keep from my own forgetting and from the way a mind will domesticate an encounter until it is good company at a dinner party. I wrote the hum, the ring, the eyes, the prints, the men, the spiral, the opening. I wrote my no and promised myself a yes. Not the kind that comes from adrenaline. The kind that comes when you are certain that you want the world to be larger than the rooms you've agreed to live in. Now it is late again. The microwave says a number that has no meaning except that it is not midnight and not morning. I am sitting with my shoes by the door, my hand on the knob, the hum in my bones a soft invitation that knows my name and has no need to shout. Outside, the street lamp hums its own petty hymn. Somewhere in the woods, a ring waits without waiting, a mouth without hunger, a threshold without threat. I will go back. I will be ordinary as I step off the sidewalk into the trail's first cool breath. I will become less ordinary as the deer path pretends not to exist and then does. I will be afraid because anything worth being near deserves that companion. I will touch the air where the ring has taught me to put my hand. I will knock. 1 2, pause. 1 2 3. And when the opening appears, as I believe it will, I will decide again, and what matters isn't which choice I make in any given midnight. What matters is that the choice exists. The woods have learned my name. I have learned theirs. And between names, a seam of light opens and closes as if the forest had a zipper, and through it something moves that is not here and is here, and it is enough, for now, to stand in its weather and admit that the world is breathing more deeply than I was taught. Thank you for watching the Quill's journey. If you're enjoying the atmosphere, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what stood out to you.